Hi everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at a jointer. It's a jointer planer. Today we'll be looking at the operation of this jointer, what a jointer is designed to do, and the safe use and setup of this jointer. So the basic function of a jointer is similar to a planer, and that's why it's often called a planer jointer, in the fact that you have a series of cutting knives that are rotating and removing material. Looking at these knives, and you will notice the machine is unplugged for me to show you this, but looking at these knives, we have a roller in here with 3 different knives. These knives rotate to actually shave or rip the material from the board. So with that said, we can only be running with the grain when joining. You should never try to joint end grain or cross grain. Never end grain, never cross grain. Okay? Joining or planing will only work with long grain and long grain. Okay? So we can joint this edge, we can joint this edge, or plane that edge. So the way this operates is on this in-feed table and this out-feed table, they function by having a difference of height in the knives removing material as that difference of height takes place. So if I loosen my in-feed table and slide this down to really exaggerate and show you what's going on, the board enters at a lower height. As it enters, the cutter head comes through, removes material at the same exact height as the out-feed table. So as this board passes through, it removes material and shaves material and actually comes out on the out-feed table. Now, this is big time exaggerated, all right? We would never want to actually remove this much material. Generally speaking, on our joiner, we are generally taking a 32nd, 16th, 3/32nd, or 1/8 of an inch at maximum, depending on the material, how aggressive you want to be, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to set this to a 1/16 of an inch. What that means is my in-feed table is a 1/16 of an inch lower than my out-feed table. So every pass I take could be taking off a 1/16 of an inch from my board. Prior to jointing the board, we need to select which edge we are going to joint, okay? This is not an arbitrary thing. We don't just simply grab the board and throw it on the joiner and start running it. What we need to do is look at the edge to determine whether it can be jointed or not. Let me show you an example of what is jointable and what is not. To look at what is jointable and what is not, I recommend throwing your board on a flat surface, okay, something that is true and flat, a cast iron work surface, a true table, so on and so forth, okay? What you're looking to determine and see is if there is a gap of daylight in the center of your board or on the edges of the board. In this particular case, when I look at this right now, I can see daylight in the center of the board. That means that both edges are touching, okay? This is the side that I want to joint. In other words, this side wants to go into the joiner. If I were to flip that, I still have the same concept. If you were to see something that looked like this, where you have, I don't know if you can see the Sharpie, but if you have a high spot in the center of the board and the board actually seesaws like this, when I joint that, you will continue to follow that jointed or that seesaw type pattern, okay? It will never rectify or correct the problem, okay? So you need to make sure that when you joint, you have daylight in the center, and the joiner will work by actually removing some of the material from this edge, some of the material from that edge, and as you continue to take passes, it will actually give you a nice, true, flat, straight, square edge. Now that we're ready to actually start this joiner, I have my in-feed table set and my out-feed table is nice and square and flat to that. What I'm going to do is I am going to plug the machine back in. Well, prior to doing that, I'm going to get the guard back in place, covering my cutter head, to take this fence, slide the fence forward to only have as minimal cutter head exposed as possible, okay? I'm only jointing a 3/4 inch thick board, which means I don't need 6 or 7 inches of cutter head exposed. So I'm going to slide my guard, give myself about an inch of cutter head, lock my fence, cover my guard, okay? At this point, let's look at our hand positioning, okay? Generally on this board, or on this joiner, excuse me, we're not going to joint anything over 12 inches in overall length, okay? So this board happens to be around 30 inches, which gives me plenty of length, okay? My hand positions. I'm going to try to keep my hands above this fence, okay? What's critical is you do not want your fingers pointing down. I try to keep them up, away in habit so that they are away from the cutter head, and your fingertips are away from the cutter head. My rear hand is going to guide the board, like so, and actually push across the joiner. While traveling through the joiner, it's critical that your board stays square and flat to this fence. This fence happens to be set at 90 degrees right now. I've already checked that with a square or earlier. So I'm going to keep my board square to that. If in the process your board rocks forward like this, your cut will not be at 90 degrees. So that board needs to be square and tight to the fence. My left hand is keeping it tight to that fence as well as down, whereas my right hand is actually pushing through the cutter head. If you look at my stance on the joiner, I'm going to remain as stationary as possible running this board, okay? I am not going to be tippy-toeing or moving across the entire joiner, okay? What I am going to be doing is planting myself directly on the right-hand side of the joiner, not on the left-hand side, the right-hand side. My hands are keeping as tight to this fence. My right hand is feeding through. I will maintain even pressure to get this board to slide across the infeed table and exit on the outfeed table. And I am going to be watching to try to keep this board flat on the outfeed table as I slide and work this board across, okay? All my safety protocol are followed, my sleeves are rolled, my glasses are on, I'm ready to operate the equipment. I will now plug the jointer in. Double check my edge. That side's going down. Power on the joiner. Wait for the machine to come to a complete stop. Now I can exit the machine. Now, on that pass, it did not take a full pass or full edge on this, so I am going to be taking multiple more passes on this board, okay? So at that point, I am going to go ahead and fire the joiner again. Wait for the machine to come to a complete stop. Now I may exit the machine. If you now take a look at my jointed edge, what you will see is that this board actually is nice and true and flat across. This edge has been jointed, is now prepared to either go on the table saw fence or to be glued up to another board with a jointed edge. What is critical is you do not need to joint both edges, all right? One edge gets jointed, the other edge gets cleaned up with the table saw. If you joint both edges, there's no guarantee that these two edges are parallel, all right? What the table saw does is give you a nice square clean edge which is parallel to the edge you just jointed, okay? So it is critical to use the table saw after this, which you can see in my other videos on safety and setup.